I offer thanks to Ghilan'nain, Halla Mother, and to Andraste, Maker Bride. As you were raised up from mortal men to stand with our creators, our makers, so raise me up now to defend this world.
Hello, I'm back, and this time I really want to take a dive into exploring Ghilan'nain, the youngest of the ancient Elven pantheon. We've been getting more and more clues that seem to imply that she might play a pretty important role in the lore, and that she might not be all we thought she was. She's seriously been sounding pretty sus to me for a while, but even more so with this new stuff coming out. So what the hell was her deal? Let's take a deep dive into all things Ghilan'nain. This will include spoilers for all games and books. So what do the Dalish say about Ghilan'nain? The first thing in all the games that we hear about her comes from the Codex called Ghilan'nain, Mother of the Halla, that can be found in Origins in the Dalish camp or Brazilian forest. They say Ghilan'nain was one of the people in the days before Arlathan, and the chosen of Andruil the Huntress. She was very beautiful, with hair of snowy white and as graceful as a gazelle. She kept always to Andruil's ways, and Andruil favored her above all others. One day, while hunting in the forest, Ghilan'nain came across a hunter she didn't know. At his feet lay a hawk, shot through the heart by an arrow. Ghilan'nain was filled with rage, for the hawk, along with the hare, is an animal much beloved of Andruil. Ghilan'nain demanded that the hunter make an offering to Andruil in exchange for taking the life of one of her creatures. The hunter refused, and Ghilan'nain called upon the goddess to curse him, so that he could never again hunt and kill a living creature. Ghilan'nain's curse took hold, and the hunter found that he was unable to hunt. His prey would dart out of sight, and his arrows would fly astray. His friends and family began to mock him for his impotence, for what use is a hunter who cannot hunt? Ashamed, the hunter swore he would find Ghilan'nain and repay her for what she had done to him. He found Ghilan'nain while she was out on a hunt with her sisters, and lured her away from them with lies and false words. He told Ghilan'nain that he had learned his lesson and begged her to come with him, so she could teach him to make a proper offering to Andruil. Moved by his plea, Ghilan'nain followed the hunter, and when they were away from all of her sisters, the hunter turned on Ghilan'nain. He blinded her first, and then bound her as one would bind a kill fresh from the hunt. But because he was cursed, the hunter could not kill her. Instead, he left her for dead in the forest. And Ghilan'nain prayed to the gods for help. She prayed to Elgar'nan for vengeance, to Mother Mythal to protect her. But above all, she prayed to Andruil. Andruil sent her hares to Ghilan'nain, and they chewed through the ropes that bound her, but Ghilan'nain was still wounded and blind, and could not find her way home. So Andruil turned her into a beautiful white deer, the first Halla, and Ghilan'nain found her way back to her sisters, and led them to the hunter who was brought to justice. And since that day, the Halla have guided the people, and have never led us astray, for they listened to the voice of Ghilan'nain. So Gilly is painted as this ethereal, beautiful, graceful, dutiful huntress who was victimized and became the first of the Halla and guided the Elven people should they need it. How nice. How whimsical. How full of shit. Let's keep in mind something that was brought to our attention in a codex found in the Emerald Graves called Blood-Spattered Notes. It says, "These appear to be the scribbled notes of a scholar named Erwin Cavey. The elements have ruined most of the writing. How many times have I sought information on the Dalish only to find that it is, once again, a tale told by a keeper Gisharel of the Relafarin clan. We can't have one keeper from years ago be our sole source of knowledge on the Dalish. There must be other voices in the Dalish clans." Because Elven history has been lost to time after a millennia of oppression, our knowledge about it generally seems to come from just this one clan, one perspective. So maybe what Keeper Gisharel has documented might not be 100% accurate.
What's your problem with the Dalish? Allergic to Halla?
They are children acting out stories misheard and repeated wrongly 1,000 times.
Oh, but you know the truth, right?
While they pass on stories, mangling details, I walk the fade. I have seen things they have not.
And that's not to say that Keeper Gisharel's accounts are 100% wrong either. We have definitely since learned a lot more about Ghilan'nain outside of this one keeper's perspective. In fact, Inquisition really seems to want us to remember her and know who she is. There's a whole unlockable area in the Exalted Plains called Ghilan'nain's Grove. We can find a couple codices from the Temple of Mathal that mention her, and we also get this gem from Kenric in Jaws of Hakon.
But this is Elven. One of their gods. What was it? Every mother finds Druffalo among sleeping juniper groves. G something. The one with the deer.
Ghilan'nain.
Yes! Brilliant, thank you. Oh, that would have bothered me all day.
So we know she's important. The writers are really trying to make sure we know her name. The first thing we hear about Gil that doesn't come from the Dalish comes from within the Temple of Mathal, giving us a clearer picture of ancient elves' perspective of her. The Codex, Ascension of Ghilan'nain, says, Ghilan'nain kept herself apart from the people. She used her powers to create animals none had ever seen. The skies teemed with her monsters, the land with her beasts. Andruil hunted them all, and after a year of killing, approached Ghilan'nain with an offer. The gods would share their power with Ghilan'nain, but only if she destroyed her creations, for they were too untamed to remain among the people. Ghilan'nain agreed and asked for 3 days to undo what she had made. On the first day, she struck down the monsters of the air, except those she presented to Andruil as a gift. On the second day, she drowned the giants of the sea, except those in deep waters, for they were too well wrought, and pride stopped her hand. On the third day, she killed the beasts of the land, except the Halla, whose grace she loved above all else. This is how Ghilan'nain was made youngest of the gods. This codex paints Gilly and her creation of animals in a much different context than Keeper Gisherel's. This shows that she was kind of a hermit and created monsters that even the powerful elven gods thought were too out of control and probably a challenge to their power, so they pretty much had no choice but to bring her into their flock or fight her. The codices we gather scattered about in the Trespasser DLC even further push this idea. This codex is called Notes on Methods of Enchantment. It says, the writing on these papers aches to be looked at, shimmering slightly as if under an enchantment. The notes are handwritten, but each letter is as perfectly uniform as from a printing press. Notes on the first attempt. Improper valences on the bindings woven into the materials led to a catastrophic unraveling. The first batch is lost, but I will have supplies brought in from the same stock to illuminate whether the imperfection is within the materials or the enchantment. Notes on the second attempt. Elegance eludes me. The aim is to improve the coordination of the body and sharpen the perception of the heart, but grafts do not live long enough to plumb their worth. The current process is ruin. The batch is lost. Begin again. Notes on the third attempt. 2 enchantments, whose matrices should have meshed, caught. The combustion caused such damage it broke several previously forged pieces. There is now a resonance between them, however, and light on my thoughts. An enchantment linked in tandem as the neck turns the head or the wrist twists the hand? Notes on the fourth attempt. The weave goes smoothly, bound tightly between many items. The stress on the energy produces finer results than a singular enchantment. Using up the last of the stock was well worth it, as I explained to it as a courtesy before final work began. Adjustments to the underlay were a great success and will allow the recipe to be made with material taken from lesser animals if the need arises. Below the letters, possibly in lieu of a signature, is the stamp of a stylized Halla head. While we can't be positive this is written by Gilly herself, the Halla head stamp definitely gives me that impression. And if it's true, put together with the previous codex, it seems like she must have been some kind of freaky Dr. Moreau or Dr. Frankenstein-esque mad scientist.
Give my creation life!
She even talks to her stock, which tells me that she was doing experiments on live sentient beings. That's pretty cruel. And if that's not enough, the short story, Horror of Hormak from the Tevinter Nights book, gives us an even more horrifying layer to all of this. I'll try to summarize what I think is important. The story features a couple of Grey Wardens who find their way into a long-lost dwarven thaig of Hormak. We know about this thaig from the codex called Cut to Kalsharok that we can get in Orzammar in Origins. It says, 1155 of the Tevinter Imperium will be known as a year of painful decisions, but we cannot waver. The threat we face is the greatest we have known. If we are overrun, all traces of the ancestors' glory will be undone. Orzammar must stand, and it must stand alone. Hormak, Kalsharok, Gundar. We have lost contact and must assume they are lost to the Horde. We must seal the weakest link in our defense, the deep roads that lead to our fallen brethren. I have ordered our finest demolitionists to place the charges. I ask that each of you think of those we have lost. They served as the warning that spurred us to action, and I know the stone will embrace them. They are the foundation of our survival, and they will not be forgotten. So this is a codex describing that when Orzammar closed off the deep roads to protect itself during the First Blight, it basically sentenced these other great tags, Hormak being one of them, to be overtaken by the Darkspawn. Anyways, back to the story. So these Grey Wardens, on a mission to find and save another lost group of Wardens, find some really creepy shit that leads them down into this really creepy tag. I'm definitely not doing it justice to describe how creepy the vibe is down there, so I really recommend reading it yourself, but did I mention it's creepy? On their way down through the deep roads, they find some super unusual Darkspawn. Like, they have way too many limbs, they're weirdly shaped, some have animal parts attached to them, and stuff like that. Oh, and the place smells super strongly of briny seawater. I think the story tells us that at least once per paragraph. The Wardens eventually make their way down the deep roads to what ends up looking like an Elven ruin. Straight up out of place in the deep roads, right? They're very interesting murals that are described there. So I'll read some snippets about it here. 3 figures, the supplicant, the queen, and the monster. Except the person and the monster change. Not a lot, but a little. Enough to tell. But the priestess remains. She was right. The creature changed a bit each time, as did the figure, but the priestess remained the same. Or at least almost the same. It was perhaps the oppressive nature of the place acting upon his worst fears, but it seemed to him that the priestess's smile grew a little wider and a little crueler with each subsequent image. The images engraved into the stone seemed almost alive, each one a perfectly frozen moment as the actors within marched through their stories. On the topmost band, stately elven kings and queens held court, their people kneeling before them in respectful supplication. On the middle, scenes of healing and succor, of disease and injury being drawn forth from the sick and dying by elven mages. And on the bottom, Aravels, far more elaborate and grandiose than any that Ramesh had ever seen, pulled by armies of Halla towards distant mountains, one of which, he realized with a start, was that same mountain that they were now beneath, the 3 jagged peaks that twisted around each other easily distinguishable in the detailed carvings. It was, taken as a whole, magnificent, and yet the more he stared at it, the more disquieting it became. There was something slightly off, something that set his teeth on edge and his palms itching for the comforting feel of his weapons. Not one specific thing, but a preponderance of little things, all adding up to an aura of quiet, deliberate menace. The striations on the columns, random at first, began to form patterns before Ramesh's eyes. The same symbol, the horns of a Halla, repeated on each column. The symbol seemed to shift, changing in an inexplicable way that made Ramesh's eyes water. He tore them away, focusing instead on the bas-reliefs that ran around the chamber. Yet even they suddenly seemed wrong. The lowest band of carvings, the Halla pulling the Aravel, was off. The Halla were different, wrong. They had too many horns for one, and a harder, more rounded look than was normal. A look that was almost insectile. And the horns themselves were longer and ridged, organic somehow. And the Aravels were unlike any he had seen. The windows were barred, and they bore more resemblance to a prison ship than anything else. The middle band, with its scenes of healing, seemed now twisted, wrong. No longer did it seem as though the mages were drawing corruption and disease out of the wounded and infirm, but instead they forced it in, pushing it through and into the fallen bodies. The expressions on the faces of those elven rulers betrayed a contempt that was almost palpable, the beatific smiles edged with disgust and disdain for the creatures at their feet. And the subjects, far from kneeling in reverence as Ramesh had first thought, seemed more to be cowering in terror. So again, we have a Halla symbol, and what I'm assuming is Ghilan'nain's signature. I'm thinking these murals probably had something to do with her. Is she the queen/priestess described here? Is this what the Ascension of Ghilan'nain Codex meant about her keeping herself apart from the people? That she hung out in the deep roads during her creepy experiments? It also really reminds me of some of the murals we see floating around in the Elfie locations in Inquisition, like in the Emerald Graves, the Exalted Plains, Temple of Mathal, etc. Are these the Halla-ish weird creatures being described in the murals? Anyway, sidetracked again, back to the story. So the wardens continue on in the stink of the briny ocean smell, and finally come to a cave chamber with a pool of nasty gray liquid. The book says, rank upon rank of grotesqueries filled the cave. Each one was a twisted horror of body parts assembled seemingly at random. The fanged maw of a serpent rested atop the slender neck of a Halla, moving rapidly on the limbs of a Varteral. A massive spider scurried about, its many eyes replaced instead with the heads of a dozen serpents, each one dripping venom from exposed fangs. And in the center, a massive pool filled with a viscous gray fluid, the scent of brine wafted forth from it. Above it, a massive lyrium crystal hung suspended. It glowed with a sickly light tinged with yellow and green. Streamers of energy flowed from it into the pool, sending it bubbling wherever it touched. They watched as a Hurlock walked toward the pool, stiff-legged. It broke the surface of the gray ichor, which reacted instantly, flowing around the creature. In moments it was completely submerged. Out of the murk rose a cocoon, iridescent and pulsing with a green light. There was a hissing sound, a flash of light, and the cocoon shattered. Yet what came out was not a Hurlock. It had the head of one, but that head rested on the body of a massive drake. Maker's breath, whispered Ramesh. The entire room was a menagerie of horror, each creature worse than the last. This was an army, not darkspawn though, something worse. So this pool seems to be a monster-making army factory. I want to bring attention to the weird yellow and green-colored lyrium, but I don't really know what to think about it other than so far we've only really seen blue and red lyrium. So at the very least, this is some strange lyrium. Could this pool also be like Mythal's Well of Sorrows in her temple, holding the will of Ghilan'nain within its waters? I mean, what compels these blighted creatures to go into it, let alone drink from it? And what I'm talking about drinking is that the Grey Warden party that they now find in this cave of monstrous chimeras, they drank from it, and now they're also part of this horror show. Turns out one of the Grey Wardens they were looking for also has been grafted into a massive centipede thing after drinking from the pool. The book says, the massive bulk shifted, the segments retreated, and the end of the creature, the head, or what seemed most like one, descended. And with it came the greatest horror of the day. Where the creature's head would be, should be, was instead a humanoid figure. He sat astride the creature. No, not astride it. Ramesh realized with revulsion that the figure was part of it. The chitinous exterior flowed into the flesh, the lines between them blurred. His body had fused with the monstrosity, become one. And the face, Ramesh knew then, with horrifying clarity, what had happened to the man he had risked everything to find. We drank. Works differently for us. Can't touch it. We need it inside. Takes a while. They turned us. 2 halves, 2 wholes, trying to be 2 ones. But I stayed me, and it hates that. It twitched, the cavern shaking in sympathy. Not forever, not for long, just for now. Enough. The buzz returned to the voice, insistent. And we waited for you. Oh yes, now you come. The creature screamed and Jovis's voice came back. Can't let this out. Got to bury it. Bury me. The words came even more slowly, each one being forced through whatever will battled Jovis's for the control of the creature. She cannot have it, not again, locked for a reason. Again, we don't know for sure that this even has anything to do with Gilly. The story never mentions her name whatsoever, but I think there's a lot of hints implying so. Jovis and another cursed warden in the story mention a she. Could they be talking about Ghilan'nain? What would happen if she did get this power back? Who locked it? So anyway, this enormous warden centipede chimera thing begins to attack and chase them, so they collapse the chamber with the pool by exploding that weird colored lyrium crystal. Ramesh, the main character, ends up able to escape to the surface after blowing up the cavern and burying the enormous centipede thing and its fellow monsters inside. The story leaves us with this foreboding statement. The mountain he'd brought down, the one that buried that nightmare under thousands of tons of rock, was not the only one to which the Aravels brought their prey. There had been, before the image is repeated, 11 others. So this seems to imply to me that there are 11 other monster-making army factories built under 11 other taigs. Possibly the remainder of the 12 great dwarven taigs? Orzammar is one of them, and Kalsharak, which we have heard in some war table missions in Inquisition, has dwarves that are quite strange. But we're getting off topic. That was a longer description of the story than I intended, but I think it's really important to see this really opposing portrayal that we're getting of Ghilan'nain to what we originally knew about her. Way back in my old-ass videos from before any of the DLC came out, so they might be a little outdated, but I talked about how Ghilan'nain was pretty fishy. You can watch the video linked here, but I'll try to summarize. In the Petitioner's Path area of the Temple of Mythal, we get the first hints that the Elven creators weren't really all we were told to believe. Solas has something to say specifically about Falun Din and Andruil.
What's this? I believe we are in the presence of the Elven goddess Andruil, Lady of the Hunt.
Or a goddess of sacrifice, according to some.
The Elven god Andruil Codex we find there says, "One day Andruil grew tired of hunting mortal men and beasts. She began stalking the Forgotten Ones, wicked things that thrive in the abyss. Yet even a god should not linger there, and each time she entered the void, Andruil suffered longer and longer periods of madness after returning. Andruil put on armor made of the void and all forgot her true face. She made weapons of darkness and plague ate her lands. She howled things meant to be forgotten, and the other gods became fearful Andruil would hunt them in turn. So Mythal spread rumors of a monstrous creature and took the form of a great serpent waiting for Andruil at the base of a mountain. When Andruil came, Mythal sprang on the hunter. They fought for 3 days and nights, Andruil slashing deep gouges in the serpent's hide. But Mythal's magic sapped Andruil's strength and stole her knowledge of how to find the void. After this, the great hunter could never make her way back to the abyss, and peace returned." So Mythal and Andruil definitely had some beef, and we know Andruil is connected to Ghilan'nain. She has been said to be Andruil's chosen, whatever that means. Maybe they were BFFs, maybe Gilly was Andruil's high priestess, or maybe they were lovers. But they definitely seem to have been connected. I mean, what better connection is there between a creature-making goddess and a hunter goddess to hunt the creations? So if Ghilan'nain was as devoted to Andruil as has been implied, was she involved in a conspiracy against Mythal that Solas is so pissed at them for?
They killed Mythal. Crime for which an eternity of torment is the only fitting punishment.
Or was she maybe seeking revenge for Andruil? In the Temple of Mythal, if your Inquisitor drinks from the well, you can translate a codex called Ancient Elven Writing. It says, "There are whispers from the Well of Sorrows. It's impossible to understand the entire text, but certain parts suddenly reveal a shadow of their original meaning. His crime is high treason. He took on a form reserved for the gods and their chosen, and dared to fly in the shape of the divine. The sinner belongs to Dirthaman. He claims he took wings at the urging of Ghilan'nain and begs protection from Mythal. She does not show him favor and will let Elgar'nan judge him." For one moment, there is an image of a shifting, shadowy mass with blazing eyes, whose form may be one or many. Then it fades. So the interesting thing to me about this codex is that Dirthaman and Ghilan'nain are both mentioned in this codex, and these two are both associated with being the chosen of Falun Din and Andruil, both of whom, as I mentioned earlier, seem to have had some drama with Mythal. And this also brings me to a mural that can be found in Skyhold at the back of Blackwall's stable, and in the building upstairs from the requisition table in Skyhold, as well as at Calenhad's Foothold and some other places. The mural doesn't look specifically elven, but it represents a bear, which was Dirthaman's animal symbol, embracing or holding a white, antlered woman, pretty similar to the descriptions we hear of Ghilan'nain. What was up with the relationship between these gods? Were they working together? Gil sounds like she was an instigator, urging that sinner to commit high treason. Why? Did she turn on Dirthaman? In the Fade, when we go looking for an old god baby Kieran and find Flemeth, they're doing their business underneath this large statue of Dirthaman, who's crying waterfalls of blood tears and a large knife in its back. Subtle metaphor, huh? And speaking of conspiring against Mythal, this reminds me of something way back in the very, 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 very beginning of the Dalish elf origin in the very first game.
Look, we didn't come here to be trouble. We just found a cave.
Yes, a cave. With ruins like I've never seen. We thought there might be,
Treasure? So you're more akin to thieves than actual bandits.
But I have proof. Here, we found this just inside the entrance.
This stone has carvings. Is this Elvish? Written Elvish?
There's more in the ruins. We didn't get very far in, though.
If you take a look at the artifact the humans give you, the description says, "A small stone statue of a woman with antlers like a Halla, with the moon under her right foot and 2 hares beside her. The base of the statue is covered in strange writing." The ruins this artifact comes from seems to have something to do with Falendin, as Tamlin tells you that the statue there is representative of him.
I can't believe this. You recognize this statue, don't you? It was one of the old gods. The Keeper called him a friend of the dead. He was a guide who took people across the Spirit Land to their final rest in the Beyond. But he wasn't an evil god, not like Fen'Haral, the Great Wolf. It doesn't seem right that a place so wrong would be his.
The woman depicted in this artifact sounds an awful lot like Ghilan'nain, and like that mural I mentioned earlier. Hares are Andrew's favorite animal, right by her side, and then she's got the moon in a very vulnerable position.
Who or what is Mythal?
She's the protector, the mother of the creators, the one who put the moon in the sky, wisest of all the gods.
So, Mythal is often associated with the moon and its creation. Why is the moon underneath Ghilan'nain's foot? Might this represent Ghilan'nain overpowering Mythal? So anyways, it definitely seems like Ghilan'nain is being set up to be some kind of force to be reckoned with, or at least recognized in the next installment of Dragon Age. In the behind-the-scenes teaser trailer from Gamescom, we saw some concept art that instantly reminded me of our creepy pal Gil and her strange creature creations. First of all, there's spider hands. Yikes. Then, this art made me think of the large, weird centipede creature in the Horror of Hormak. It's enormous and has 2 tentacle things, or sea serpent-like tails, and has way too many legs. But in the BioWare Stories and Secrets book, we see a slightly edited version of this same artwork. It seems to be kind of zoomed out, but it now has a more feminine-looking upper body and a strange moon-shaped headdress and a spear. The description says, "The evil gods have Thetis in their sights, and only heroes can stop them. The shadows of the past stir, and new heroes must rise to fight them." So this takes us to the newest trailer for Dragon Age 4 that was shown at the 2020 Video Game Awards. We see one of Solas's infamous murals in it, featuring Moonhead herself. So this has led a lot of people to speculate that this might be an image of Ghilan'nain, or at least somehow related to her, because of it being described as an evil god, and her connection with weird monstrous creatures. It also looks like this creature is splashing up out of the sea. The behind-the-scenes trailer also shows us a lot of ocean scenes, including this concept art of a kraken-like creature in the sea. This ocean theme and monstrous creatures brings to mind both the briny ocean smell that was so present in the Horror of Hormak, and all of the sea monsters drawn in all of the seas around Thetis in the map in Tevinter Knight's book. And it also brings us straight back to the Ascension of Ghilan'nain Codex I mentioned earlier. The specific part I'm talking about says, "On the 2nd day she drowned the giants of the sea, except those in deep waters, for they were too well wrought, and pride stopped her hand." I know my font doesn't show it very well, but this has a capital P. By the way, did you know that Solus means pride in Elven? Why would Solus want to keep these huge monstrous sea creatures alive? Knowing Solus, they must be useful somehow. But how? Maybe some kind of protection for mainland Thedas from whatever's across the ocean? Maybe he just thinks they're cute. Maybe he's a part of PETA. I don't know, but it looks like we might find out in the next game. All of this stuff about the sea also makes me think of a couple things. First, the impending Qunari threat. The Qunari are mainly from Saharan and Parvalin, 2 islands across the seas from mainland Thedas. But we know that before they landed in Thedas, they came from unknown lands across the sea. There have been theories floating around about the Qunari, or the Kossith, as their ancient forebears are called, being a created race, mainly based on what an old god baby Kieran says to a Qunari inquisitor.
You're very tall. Mother didn't say you were Qunari.
Oh? I'm told it's the first thing one notices about me.
I noticed your blood. It doesn't belong to your people.
And what Corypheus says to a Qunari inquisitor.
What do they call you? A Qunari? Your blood is engorged with decay. Your race is not a race. It is a mistake.
And the fact that we don't really know much about what the Kossith even look like, as according to World of Thedas Volume 1, they have practiced selective breeding for thousands of years.
What about Qunari who existed before the Qun?
The people we came from. They're called the Kossith, but we don't use that word for the race. We came south to Thedas because the Kossith were... I don't know. We had to leave. The stories aren't clear. But I don't expect they look much like us. Whatever they are. Well, you know how we have horns. We kind of look more... dragony than most people. Maybe it's that. But a few of the Ben Hasrath have this crazy old theory. See, the Tamathrans control who we mate with. They breed us for jobs like you'd breed dogs or horses. What if they mixed in some dragon a long time ago? Maybe drinking the blood, maybe magic, I don't know. But something in that dragon we killed spoke to me.
So if the Qunari were a constructed race, which is a whole other theory I can get into another time if anyone's interested, could it have been Ghilan'nain and her creature-constructing ways that somehow led to their development? This also brings to mind some other mysterious races we know next to nothing about, that a lot of people speculate might be similarly related. The strange scaled ones that we hear about in the Chronicles of a Forgotten War Codex in the Descent DLC, and the Executors, who are literally known as those across the sea. The Executors are mentioned in Hard and Hightown, and also in War Table missions in Inquisition, so if you're not into reading all that extra stuff, you might have missed them. But one also shows up in the Dreadwolf Take You story Into Winter Nights. This Executor in the story is described as such. A figure covered head to toe in dark robes of Virantium samite, with a thin mesh dropping down to cover the hood. The dark robes were trimmed in a pattern Charter had never seen, twisting shapes that curled to points in places that made her eyes hurt. A cup of what looked like dark red wine sat before the figure, untouched by leather-gloved hands, but she caught a faint whiff of the ocean from his robes, and something beyond the ocean. The Executor. Enough! The voice that came from the Executor could have been male or female, young or old. It was less a voice than the idea of a voice, rendered acceptably, but no more. We came because we possess a shared interest in the wolf. So it should be noted the Executor also speaks in all italics in the text. So what does this mean about them? And in the story, Solus basically petrifies the Executor as he does the Qunari and Trespasser, before allowing it to share its information, and he warns Charter, the elf from Inquisition, that they are dangerous. They also smell of the sea, which brings us back to that briny smell really emphasized in Ghilan'nain's monster-making pool. So could they also be related to Ghilan'nain's creations? Another weird connection with Ghilan'nain and the Executors comes from a short story called Ruins of Reality that was released on the Dragon Age website for Dragon Age Day 2020. In the story, it talks about an elf experiencing strange reality-bending magic in the Arlathan forest while focusing on snagging a crystal Halla figurine from a statue of Ghilan'nain. The piece of art that accompanies the story shows a figure in a cloak, with what looks pretty similar to what we heard the Executors' symbol to be in Inquisition. A triangle point down with 2 wavy lines through it. Could also be reading into that a lot. There could just be cracks in this triangle, I'm not sure. But either way, this cloaked figure also looks pretty similar in style to these 2 concept arts that have also been released recently. Anyways, I feel like I'm rambling and need to rein it back into Gilly. Basically, my point is that it seems like Ghilan'nain will definitely have some kind of connection to the upcoming games and stories coming at us. And she doesn't seem as sweet and innocent as we had all originally thought. This leaves me with a lot of questions, though, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. In the original story of Ghilan'nain and the Hunter, she got some pretty severe injuries. Did this really happen? Or is it a metaphor for something, maybe? Who could the Hunter have been? I'm also curious why Solas would stop her from destroying her sea monsters. Solas seems to have a reason and a plan for everything. Why did Ghilan'nain build her monster-making factories under the main dwarven taigs? What, if anything, did the dwarves have to do with her? Is this similar to the lyrium mining facility that we find in the Trespasser DLC, where we find elven statues in the Deep Roads? Does this have anything to do with the elves of Arlathan taking refuge with dwarves, as we learned in the Witch Hunt DLC? And lastly, does the riddle from the Veilfire statue puzzle in Trespasser mean anything? It says, one sees the hunter, one flees from it, one hunts it in turn, one outwits them all. If Andril is the hunter and Ghilan'nain's the Halla, why is she fleeing from her if she was her chosen? Or maybe a cigar is just a cigar. What do y'all think? Let me know if I've missed anything about Ghilan'nain, because I really think she's going to play a big role coming up. It seems like she might be bringing Dragon Age back to its dark fantasy roots, which I am so here for. Anyways, I'd love to hear. Like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Bye!